Stirling Castle along the Minden Road was known to locals as Birkenhorst Chateau. It had been constructed just a few years before the war and will become an important location for the front line, first in French hands, and then later during the war it was a German position close to the front lines. The Germans used poison gas for the very first time on the Western Front on 22 April 1915 in the Ypres Salient. This chlorine gas caused huge numbers of casualties, enabling the German army to breach the Allied lines over some 6.5 kilometers. The Germans then advanced some 10 kilometers deep into the Allied territory. A second gas attack followed on the 24th, this time against the Canadians. On 29 April, a counterattack by the French General Foch failed and it was decided to withdraw to new lines that ran from Sanctuary Wood over Hooge to the Bellewaarde and Hooge. The retreat in this area started on the night of the 1st to the 2nd of May, with the heavy artillery, and the troops were being moved the night of the 3rd on the 4th of May. A patrol of Rear 248 discovered that the British trenches in front of them had been abandoned. The Canadian huts in Pollingen Wood were also abandoned, and by 0800 hours, the unit was now at the northwestern corner of Pollingen Wood. Infantry Regiment 132 just relieved Rear 202 and went to Nonnebassen and Stirling Castle with Rear 248 in reserve. Near Hooge were the 1st Arguland Sutherland Highlanders, the 9th Royal Scots, while the 1st Royal Scots moved to the east of Hooge. More to the north, 3rd and the 4th King's Royal Rifle Corps retreated through the lines of the 4th Rifle Brigade and the 2nd King's Shropshire's Light Infantry. Princess Patricia's Light Infantry had been at the southern edge of Pollingen Wood and had to construct and dig their own new lines near Bellewaarde. Early in the morning of the 4th, they had almost completed a new main trench line. This was a situation from the German side at the new front line. Infantry Regiment 132 was now close to the Bellewaarde Lake, keeping that side of the Minden Road, whilst on the other side Infantry Regiment 172. Rear 248 was just south of the Nonnebassen. Fighting in the Hooge and Bellewaarde area continued. On 24 and 25 May, there was another German attack in this area, in which they captured the high grounds at Hooge and the Bellewaarde Ridge. At the end of May, the fighting of the Hooge diminished and both sides concentrated on strengthening their trenches and their lines. German troops were transported to the front by, amongst other transports, the tramway to Geluved, which had already suffered severely from the war. It was also from this period that both sides also started with the Underground War. German pioneers repaired the tramway tracks up to the Herenthaler Wood, whilst at Veldhoek there was a pioneer park which was supplied every night by a tram. The material was also delivered to the front line during the night. The book on Geluved during World War I gives us some very interesting numbers for the period October to December 1915 of what was moved in this area. 13,750 light wooden beams and poles, 9 kilometers of barbed wire, 7,820 hurls and bundles of brushwood, 6,725 beams, 880,000 sandbags, and 1,085 rails. Whilst on a weekly basis there were 330,000 kilograms of gravel and 150,000 kilograms of cement. Tunnel construction had also started and 5,798 wooden frames were delivered as well. In the meantime, the Hooge Hamlet, with the remains of the chateau, farm and other houses, as well as the wood, was slowly reduced to rubble. At the Hooge Museum there are several displays depicting the early stages of the fighting in the Hooge area, showing German infantry and also French Zouaves and British cavalry. Even today one cannot help but notice Hellfire Corner at Ypres. It is one of the main roundabouts in the area, where several roads come together. During the Great War this was a most dangerous location from where the troops came from Ypres towards the front lines at Hooge. This was also the case for the men who were to participate in the First Battle of Bellewaarde on 16 June 1915. Among them were the 1st Battalion of the Northumberland Fusiliers, 10th Liverpool Scottish, 1st Battalion Royal Scots Fusiliers, the 1st Battalion of the Lincolnshire Regiment, the 4th Battalion Royal Fusiliers, part of the 1st Battalion Cheshire Field Company, the Army's Service Corps, the 1st Battalion of the Honourable Artillery Company, the 4th Battalion of the Horn Highlanders, and the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Irish Rifles. On the German side, there was the Reserve Infantry Regiment 246, Reserve Infantry Regiment 248, both from the 54th Reserve Division, plus the Infantry Regiment 132. They were backed by German artillery from Reserve Feldartillery Regiment 54 and the Feldartillery Regiments 66 and 80. The British units were close to the Cambridge Road, whilst the German units were on the ridges opposite of them.
Behind me, as you will see, is the Cambridge Road. It's that line of grass that we have here. And right down the edge there, you will actually see that there is Whitport Farm. Whitport Farm was actually a dressing station. The Liverpool Scottish were actually moving from there at the kick-off point. So when the whistle were blown, they actually started from that edge, the southern edge of Bellewaarde battlefield. And they were actually then moving towards the Germans further up here.
Whitport Farm would also have an advanced dressing station till 3rd Ypres. In 1917 a concrete shelter was constructed for this purpose, which has largely survived to this day and is now on private property.
To my right is the line of the Ypres Rulers Railway, as it would have been in 1915. This is the northern edge of the battlefield. To my left is the southern edge where the Liverpool Scottish kicked off. Many of their troops were actually ordered to come to the northern section to help out because this particular area was being hit quite badly. 3 of those soldiers were actually found later by a German troop. And one of those Germans was actually a doctor they found that these 3 soldiers were dead with no wounds, so it's clearly blast that actually affected them. They took the men's tags and took whatever documents they had in their pockets, letters from home, that sort of thing. They buried them, and they buried them just here, at this area just there. And they then went about their daily tasks. Later on in 1922, the doctor was looking through his paperwork from the war years, and he found the documents that he kept from this soldier. The soldier was called Corporal Bartlett. His family was friendly with Noel Gervais. He was supposed to have been sent home for his commission, but decided to stay to be with his pals on that particular day because it was so important. Some of the documents that were taken off his body, or one of the documents, was a telegram from his mother to say that his father, who had been travelling on the Lusitania, which was actually torpedoed and sunk, was actually found and he was safe. Bartlett actually received that on the 15th, the day before he died. This German soldier, doctor, was a man of honour, and he decided that he would get in touch with a member of the family of Bartlett. He got in touch with Bartlett's mother and explained everything that had happened, how they found the bodies, and it was blast that killed them, where they buried them, but unfortunately you wouldn't think that they would be found now. And he actually drew a small map, and on that map is where he marked the area which we started off with just here, which was his final place. This stone shows the regimental badge and was originally sited above the main entrance to the regiment's headquarters in Liverpool. It was donated to and placed here by the city of Ypres in July 2000, the regiment's centenary year, as a memorial to all those who have served in the Liverpool Scottish and have died in the service of their country. The Liverpool Scottish Bellewaarde, 16th of June 1915. From the line 250 metres west of this point, 23 officers and 519 other ranks of the 1st 10th Scottish Battalion, the King's Liverpool Regiment, advanced east up the slope towards the German trenches on the Bellewaarde Ridge. 4 officers and 75 other ranks were killed. 11 officers and 201 other ranks were wounded, and 6 officers and 103 other ranks were missing. Of the missing, all the officers and, with very few exceptions, all the men were subsequently reported killed. The Northumberland Fusiliers actually were in Railway Wood just here. The bombardment had just stopped, the whistles were blown, and the soldiers with their bayonets and their bombs started the attack. They left the trenches to actually move across a very short space of no man's land, and very quickly they took the first line German trenches. Because it was relatively easy, they moved straight onto the second line and the third line. And the third line actually took them over to this area over here, which is quite a vast expanse.
Over 4,000 men killed, missing, wounded or taken prisoner on the British side, with over 1,000 men killed in the battle. Although casualties on the German side were slightly lower due to the higher ground they were holding, some of the regiments suffered terribly as well.
This is one of the most frequently visited graves in Sanctuary Wood Cemetery. A young officer named Gilbert Talbot, who was killed in severe fighting for Hooge in late July 1915, which came after the Germans' first use of flamethrowers against his unit, the 7th Rifle Brigade. Gilbert was the son of the Lord Bishop of Winchester. His brother Neville was a chaplain within the 6th Division. Neville was a good friend of another chaplain, Tubby Clayton. Tubby had already begun a place of rest and recreation in Popperinga by acquiring a large house that was open to all. It became known as Talbot House in memory of Gilbert here. Talbot House, using British signalling code of the time, was Toch, and Toch became the title of a Christian charitable fellowship that exists to this day.
One of the units that was very active in this area in 1915 was the Rifles.
In the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915, the army again had to change its tactics with the advent of the poison gas used by the Germans in April 1915, and also the mining of the Germans and the British under places such as Railway Wood, Hill 60, Bellewaarde Ridge. So the tactics employed by the British Army then had to improve to first equal and then surpass the German Army's tactics of 1918. And the tradition of the Rifle Brigade and King's Royal Rifle Corps and the other regiments of the British Army that were considered rifle regiments was to use their initiative. When a new weapon was issued to the British Army, to invent new tactics for this weapon, and the soldiers were used, as I said, to use their initiative and their training. And the effect on the British Army of the fighting up around Ypres in 1915 and also around Loos and Lens was to show that the British Army had to keep on evolving its tactics. And in doing so, by 1917, the officer in charge of British infantry tactics was a rifleman from the King's Royal Rifle Corps.
It became part of the front line in front of Ypres when the British withdrew further towards the city after the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915. From that point, the lines crystallised here, and it became the epicentre of close-in fighting for another year. The chateau and its grounds and the stables and outbuildings became a scene of intense trench warfare, with both sides raiding, firing artillery at the other side, and eventually trying to undermine the other side from below, resulting in the terrible scares and frights for the infantry of being blown up from below. The lake behind me, the small green covered lake as it is now, is what is left of a series of craters here, especially around the blowing of a large crater on the 6th of June 1916.
There is quite a lot of focus on the Battle of the 16th June 1915 in the displays of the Hooge Museum, and one of them is specifically on the Liverpool Scottish and their participation. One of the men killed that day was Sergeant Alf Gobday of the 1st Battalion of the Northumberland Fusiliers. He played with the Tottenham Hotspurs in the 1913-1914 season. He made 24 appearances and played in the FA Cup, the semi-finals against Arsenal. 11 players from the same club were killed in the war, with the most famous one probably being Walter Toll, who was killed near Vouvray in France. In the area near Railway Wood there are also some other personal memorials that were erected after the war for officers that fell in various other battles in this area. Close to this location the body of John Condon was also found. He was considered to be the youngest soldier killed in the Great War on the Commonwealth side, aged 14. Until today it still remains a point of discussion how old he really was. Today no more traces can be found in the landscape at Hooge from the original Hooge crater. During the war it changed several times from hands, but most of the time it was occupied by the Germans. During this period large fortification works were done to it, making it a stronghold with dugouts and trenches.
Woonark van Antwerpen, daar staan we nu. Maar veel is er niet van overgebleven, net hetzelfde zoals de vestingen. De eerste wallen waren aardewallen met een palissade erop. En die dateren al van de 13e eeuw. Pas in de 14e eeuw werden de eerste Bourgondische muren opgericht met hun torens. Op 25 maart 1678 veroverden de Fransen. De Fransen veroverden gewoon Ypres van de Spanjaarden. En Lodewijk XIV besloot gewoon om de vestingen zwaarder te laten verdedigen. Sébastien de Pré de Vauban, de maarschalk van Lodewijk XIV, begon in 3 fases de vestingen te verdedigen, te versterken. Maar uiteindelijk 2 fases werden vervolledigd. En een van de fases vond hier plaats en was het Woonark van Antwerpen. Dat werd gebouwd op het Spaanse citadel die in 1669 werd opgericht. Hij besloot die af te breken en een complete nieuwe woonwerk op te bouwen. In 1713, de Oostenrijkers en de Fransen komen overeen om Oostenrijk Ypres te schenken. Maar Jozef II was niet echt geïnteresseerd in de vesting van Ypres, maar in zijn eigen land. Het kostte te veel voor te renoveren, voor te onderhouden. Dus besloot hij die af te breken. De Nederlanders komen dan binnen in Ypres. En later opnieuw de Fransen onder leiding van Napoleon. En die was totaal niet geïnteresseerd in de vestingen. Die onderhoudt je gewoon niet. Ypres leed onder Napoleon-tijd en Yperlingen begon zelfs te stelen en af te breken van de vestingen. Maar in 1815, nieuwe hoop voor de vestingen. De Nederlanders trekken terug Ypres binnen. En zij begonnen met de renovatie van de vestingen. Maar ook nieuwe gebouwen werden opgericht. De infanteriekazerne, het kruidmagazijn, maar ook de kasematten, waar wij nu op staan. Iedereen zegt de kasematten zijn in de hoofdwallen en de kasematten zijn Frans. Nee, de hoofdwallen zijn Souterrains en kasematten zijn Nederlanders. Het zijn Nederlandse structuren die hier onder de grond nog steeds bevinden. En tijdens een oorlog werd die gebruikt, maar daar vertel ik liever iets later over. Tot heden is de kasematten niet meer toegankelijk. Je kan ze zien je kan ze zien van boven, maar je kan er niet in. Ze worden nog steeds gebruikt, maar enkel voor overnachten van vleermuizen. Het instortingsgevaar verbiedt enige toegang tot de kasematten. Maar in 1830, de Belgen worden onafhankelijk verklaard. België wordt opgericht. En de Belgen besloten in de jaren 1855 om niet meer in Ypres te verdedigen en een andere grenssteden, maar in steden zoals Antwerpen en Luik. En hierdoor werden heel wat gebouwen en structuren gewoon verkocht. De nieuwe eigenaars die braken alles af, Maar gelukkig, de eigenaar van deze grond heeft enkel oppervlakkig afgebroken en niet ondergronds. En gelukkig zijn enkele gebouwen gewoon bewaard gebleven.
Time when we talk about the various locations where the Allied soldiers took shelter at Ypres, we think about the various locations inside the city. However, this location, the Hornwork of Antwerp, is just outside the old city between the Eminent Gate and the Eminent Road.